we all have to be honest with ourselves as adults. And people that have been in relationships, you know, we know sometimes those relationships get ugly, you know, and sometimes it doesn't come out into the forefront.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. The walls appear to be closing in on Diddy. After several civil lawsuits in the last couple of months, a video leak of him displaying some horrifying behavior, and reports of a federal investigation planning to bring accusers in front of a grand jury, it seems like the past of the music mogul is finally catching up to him. Last week on this channel, we covered his apology following the video that leaked of him and his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura, and the feedback was very positive. A lot of commenters had some really interesting things to say, and in the conversations that we were having, there were two other videos that came up that some of the viewers asked me to talk about as well. Now, both these videos are from his past, before any of this came out, but they exhibit certain red flags, both in what he's saying and in his body language. And I always had them on my list to cover them, but I never found the right time. But now, as a follow-up to last week's video, I think the timing is perfect. The first video is an interview that Diddy had done with Ellen shortly after the world found out that Chris Brown had physically assaulted Rihanna. And Diddy's position on the matter was questionable, to put it lightly. The second video, and this is one that several viewers asked about, is a very strange interaction between Diddy, Kevin Hart, and Usher at an event that all three were attending, and Kevin Hart was just hosting this thing on the camera, and a very strange conversation took place. We're going to look at facial expressions, body language, and word choice to try to determine what the heck was going on with Diddy, and were there signs for this kind of behavior that early on. Let's dive right in.
There's a lot of talk going on with Chris Brown being at your place in Miami, and you arranging Chris and Rihanna getting back together. Now, you want to talk about that?
See, I wouldn't use my Twitter to talk about that because that's somebody else's business.
I know, but you gave them your house.
Yeah. But we're talking about Twitter.
Yeah.
How you use Twitter, and that's something else. I'm just saying I wouldn't really Twitter about that.
Okay, let's not Twitter about it. Let's talk about it.
Okay. Sure.
Let's talk about it because I think you clearly have a lot of people going, why would you do that? Why would you give Chris, a guy who hit a girl, and he's jet skiing around in your, you know, I don't understand, because, I mean, listen, I was a huge fan of Chris's. I love Chris, his music, he's a talented guy, but to hit a girl...
Yeah, because I know both of them, and it's my house, and I'm allowed to give my house to whoever I want to give my house to. That's number one. Number two is that I'm the type of person that I don't cast a stone or cast a judgment on anybody. And so if a friend or friends ask me for a favor, then I'm going to be there for a favor as long as I know that the energy of the favor is positive for two people to sit down and talk about a situation that they're in. I'm not going to get involved in it. I'm not going to pass judgment on it. If I could be there as a friend during hard times, then I'm going to be there as a friend.
Okay, so first of all, it's really, really difficult to look at this specific interview and ignore what we know now. Because if we take into consideration what we know now, because of that video that leaked, we can look at the clip we just saw and other clips that we're about to see and look at it as someone who's guilty of something horrible defending someone else who's guilty of that same behavior. It's going to be rather challenging to look at these behaviors objectively as opposed to just looking at everything and saying this is just an abuser doing and saying what an abuser would do. But let's give it a try from the top. There's a body part that I pay a lot of attention to, and we've talked about how for Diddy it's different from most people. That body part is the eyebrows. There is a ton of research on the eyebrows, and more particularly the eyebrow flash, when we raise the eyebrows. Researchers believe that in the way that we evolved, we gained a lot more eyebrow mobility because we use them to communicate a lot of things non-verbally. And the research shows that usually when we see the eyebrows go up, it comes down to one of three things: emphasize, some form of social connection or social interaction, or surprise, when something surprises us. In essence, all over the world, the eyebrows give importance to something, whether it's a topic, a person, or an event. But in Diddy's case, historically, his eyebrows move very, very little. He has entire interviews where they barely move. The apology video that we looked at last week, they barely moved. And we could speculate as to why they don't move, a very common guess being certain cosmetic procedures. But the important thing when we're baselining isn't necessarily why, but just to note that they don't move. However, in this interaction with Ellen, it's different. there are several moments where we do see a big eyebrow flash. One of the first ones we see is so big that even with the camera zoomed out, we not only see the eyebrows go up, but we see the eyes open up as well. And it's when she's talking about what he did, and he starts by responding that she shouldn't have tweeted about it. And he said, I wouldn't Twitter about it.
It's Twitter, and that's something else. I'm just saying I wouldn't really Twitter about that.
Okay, let's not Twitter about it.
I think this is a really interesting moment for those eyebrows to go up, and I think there are two reasons it's happening. The first one is emphasis, because he's shifting the attention, right? She's trying to talk about one thing, and he's going, I wouldn't Twitter about that. And his sentence drops at the end. Like, that's it. That's all I have to say about this whole topic is that I wouldn't Twitter about that. That's what's important here. Not the Chris Brown thing, the Twitter thing. The second reason I think it's happening, combined with that emphasis, is a reason that's kind of hidden in the three that we often talk about, right? Because we say emphasis, social connection, or surprise. But in social connection, it's not just positive. Like, we do see it in greetings, the eyebrow flash a lot, but also think of a parent when their kid is doing something they shouldn't be doing, and the parent just looks at the kid like this. So it's still a social greeting, it's still an acknowledgement, but it's not necessarily a hello, it's like, I'm watching you. It's disciplinary. I think that's definitely a big part of what that eyebrow flash is. In that moment as he's saying, I wouldn't Twitter about that, not only is he emphasizing, but there's also a disciplinary element to that statement. But it's also just completely sidetracking the question, right? Because she's asking, why is that something that you did? People want to know. And he's saying, well, I wouldn't Twitter about that. And that's it. That's everything he's saying about that. And that's a non-answer statement. In interviews and interrogations, whenever an answer is provided, we ask ourselves, did that answer my question and did it answer my entire question? In this case, it didn't answer any part of the question. She's asking about a specific thing and he's completely turning it around and making this about Twitter. It subconsciously signals that either he doesn't want to talk about this or he knows that he really doesn't have a good answer here. But Ellen turns it around with a joke and says, okay, let's not Twitter about it, let's talk about it. And that gets a very positive reaction from the audience. So she catches this attempt to sidetrack and using humor puts it right back on track. Then after she puts the conversation back on track, he provides an answer that at first I was like, okay, that might be a decent justification that he's gonna come up with here, but he ended it before he even made a point. And I'm not even sure that's the point he was gonna make because he says, that, first of all, I know both of them and it's my house. And at first, I thought the point he was going to make, having said that, is I know both of them. I spoke to each of them individually and they both expressed that they're interested in working it out. And since it's my house, it's neutral ground. I know that it's safe for Rihanna and they could get there and they could talk about this and work it out. That's where I thought he might have been going with this. And I would have said, okay, if he talked to her and he feels like the house is a safe place where they could have this conversation, maybe that would make sense. But he never even said that. He said, I know both of them and it's my house and I could give my house to whoever I want to give it to. And that's it. End of point. And I was left there wondering, so? What are you talking about? So what? Okay, it's your house. We've established that. It's your house. You give it to whoever you want. Again, that's a non-answer because she's saying, after the news came out that he hit her, why would you do that? And he's just talking about how it's his house and he's allowed to give it to anyone. Yeah, nobody debated that. And then we have the second part of his answer, which again, knowing what we know now, it's very easy to look at it and say, okay, well, this is someone who has done a horrible act like that, thinking to himself that if ever people were to find out about that, they wouldn't judge him in the same way that he claims he's not judging Chris Brown in that scenario. But as sneaky as his answer is there, because it seems like he's saying, I don't judge, I give him the benefit of the doubt. If the intention is good, I believe they should talk it out and all this stuff. There's two things that are wrong with that statement. The first one is the focus on Chris Brown. And we're going to go on here and you're going to see a lot more how the focus is on him as opposed to Rihanna. There should have been some focus on her as well. For him to say, I spoke to her as well and she wants to work it out. I've made sure that it's a safe environment, something along those lines. But there doesn't seem to be any of that. But the second big issue with what he's saying here is that he has this position of, I don't judge. But you did judge. You judged that Chris Brown's behaviors weren't bad enough to merit not running to his rescue. It's a complete misdirect. No one's saying that he should sentence Chris Brown here and decide if he should get the death penalty or not. But if he's humbling himself in saying that he doesn't have the power to judge, he has to concede that he also doesn't have the power to forgive, which is what he's done here. Look how long his eyebrows stay up when he's talking about if a friend asks him for a favor, he's going to do that favor as long as the intention is positive. And he's got his eyes wide open, eyebrows up, and he's looking at Ellen as he's saying this. And I think there are two things here once again. Once again, I think there's emphasis there, really stressing how important forgiveness is. And I think the second element there is that social approval, social connection, eyebrow flash, to where he's connecting with her in this moment as he's talking about forgiveness, and he's trying to socialize and normalize forgiveness.
Right.
But I don't know the exact particulars. I didn't get into it. I'm not going to do this or do that. It's a dark time for them, and I was there more as a support. That was it.
I think you were coming from a place of a friendship and of kindness and support. And it's just, it's hard for me, and I don't believe in judgment either, but I don't want any girl out there thinking it's okay to go back to a guy who hit her. I don't want any girl to think that.
I don't think... No, but you all put me in it, so I'm gonna speak on it. I don't think that it's right for anybody to hit anybody at the end of the day, you know. And I don't think it's right. You know, I think that we all have to be honest with ourselves as adults. And people have been in relationships, you know. We know sometimes those relationships get ugly, you know, and sometimes it doesn't come out into the forefront the way this one has come out. And it's a lot of stones being thrown, and we don't know exactly what's going on.
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard to not find it obvious that right there at the end he's talking about himself, because he's saying sometimes these stories don't come to the forefront, which doesn't even apply to that situation, and, you know, we shouldn't judge. So it's just so hard to not look at the obvious, which is he's talking about his own situation, not Chris Brown and Rihanna. But let's go back to the top and come back to that point. There's another eyebrow flash right in the beginning of that clip when he talks about being there for them for support. And again, it's that same idea, that same support from earlier that got this extended eyebrow flash. Here again, as he talks about support, we get that eyebrow flash. That's what's important, support. You have to support people when this happens to them. But the part I can't get past in terms of word choice is in the beginning when he goes, it was a dark time for them. No, it wasn't. It was a dark time for her. Now, I understand what he means is that it was a dark time for their relationship. And yeah, maybe they were each going through something, but the moment he laid her hands on her, he lost all his right and she was in the right. And again, there seems to be lacking this focus on her in this case. Now, Ellen shows her experience as an interviewer here because she does something that if you go to the top of the interrogation game, we're talking FBI, CIA, military interrogators, there's something that they're taught and used very effectively, and she applied it here. It's when she says that, I know what you did came out of friendship and kindness, and what she's doing there is she's socializing and minimizing this behavior and saying, it came from a good place, it's not a big deal, I get what you were doing. So she's kind of trying to relate with that to get him to talk about it more. I have a whole video on the channel here where I talk about the best way that interrogators use to get people to open up. And it's very similar to this. I'll leave a link in the description. You guys can even see examples of an interrogation where this works extremely effectively. But again, it's just a way for her to, instead of creating a disconnect there and saying, no, it's not out of love or friendship, it's inexcusable, she's kind of trying to see it from his side to get him to connect more and open up a little bit more. Then she says that she doesn't believe that any woman should go back to a man who hit her. And the audience clearly connects with that. And he elaborates on that in saying, I don't think it's right for anyone to hit anyone. So again, he tries to sidetrack there and make it a more global thing, you know? Take it from the specific and go to more non-specific. Oh, I don't think anyone should hit anyone. And he goes further down that path by saying, you know, people have been in relationships and we know that sometimes it gets ugly. And this is exactly what he did with his apology video that we covered last week, right? Right in the beginning of the video, and we talked about this in the analysis, he said, it's really difficult to reflect on the darkest times of your life, but sometimes you have to do that.
It's so difficult to reflect on the darkest times in your life, but sometimes you got to do that.
So it's kind of like he was trying to make this thing that he's going through relatable for everyone. Like we all have to reflect on the darkest times of our life as if we have moments that are that dark. And he's doing the same thing here. He's going, people have been in relationships, and he looks to the audience. We see him looking to the audience in this case, which is really interesting because there's an audience there, whereas in his apology video, there wasn't. So he's saying people have been in relationships. We know that sometimes it gets ugly. So he has this habit of taking really bad things and then talking to an audience and saying that, you know, sometimes you got to face the darkness. Sometimes relationships get bad, to kind of make it seem like these things are normal and we all go through things like this. but we don't. Most of us don't go through things at this heavy extreme. But in essence, what he's doing here is he's normalizing these extreme behaviors. And at the very least, I think that in this clip, we saw evidence of him thinking that getting physical in a relationship is not that bad. It's forgivable. We shouldn't judge. And we all have our bad moments, and he's just comparing it to other bad moments. So at the very least, I don't think he realizes just how bad and unforgivable physical abuse is. Does that mean for a fact that if I had seen this interview in real time back then, I would have been like, oh my God, he's hiding something. He's the same as Chris Brown. He's done these things too, and he wants us to be nice to him when it comes out. No, I don't think so. Despite what some polarized commenters who don't really understand what critical thinking is might think is obvious. Oh my God, it's so obvious. If you look at it, it's so obvious. I don't think it's necessarily that obvious that he himself behaved this way based on this interview. I think it's obvious that he excuses it a lot more than your average person.
These are two young individuals. We need to pray for them, and we need to give certain support, but you don't need to start just saying that you know something that you don't know. You wasn't in that car. I wasn't in that car, and it isn't right for him to put his hands on her or her to put his hands on him, and we don't know what the problem is, but we need to pray for them, and we need to do things to support them, and that's all I want to say about it.
Again, so much more of the same. Right in the beginning, as he says, certain support. Again, we said eyebrow flash, normalizing support. And then we set same eyebrows up with his eyes open looking at her when he's saying, you weren't in that car, you can't judge them, it's not right for you to talk about this. It's that same disciplinary kind of I've got my eye on you thing from earlier when he was saying you shouldn't talk about this on Twitter. Now he's saying you shouldn't talk about this. Same thing, same eyebrows, eyes open. Okay, that was the Ellen video. Now let's move on to this weird Kevin Hart, Usher, and Diddy video. So this is from a while ago, and the clip has surfaced, but there's very little context as to what is happening. But it seems like it's some event that Diddy was hosting, presumably, and Kevin Hart was kind of emceeing something with the cameras, maybe interviewing some guests. Not very sure, but there's an interaction on camera between Diddy, Usher, and Kevin Hart, and there is a lot of stuff going on with the behaviors. Take a look.
That's my brother right here from day one. We used to wake up and, pause, but like, check this out. Back in the days when he was like 10 and I was a little bit older, his older brother, we used to fight over the Frosted Flakes. You know what I'm saying? Before pause was invented. You know what I'm saying? But it's my brother for real. We used to actually wrestle off of the Frosted Flakes because he used to always get up early with me. And now he's one of the richest stars in the world. And
what the did Puff just say? Nobody's going to acknowledge this but me. Puff just said we used to wrestle over the Frosted Flakes. And we're streaming live. That was stupid. Listen, that was stupid. Listen.
We're having a good time, yo. Oh, your Usher made it in the... Hey, yo.
Okay, so a lot going on there. I want to start with what happens right in the beginning, which relates very much to one of my favorite psychological guilt detecting techniques. So right in the beginning, he's talking and he goes, this is my brother right here. We used to wake up. Damn, pause. And he kind of catches himself in that statement after saying we used to wake up.
That's my brother right here from day one. We used to wake up and, pause, but like, check this out.
Now think about that. What he said there isn't that bad. It's not that guilty, because if I was talking and my brother was next to me and I would say to you, oh, me and my brother when we were little, we used to wake up and play video games together, nobody would think anything of that sentence. It's not what he said. It's the thought in his head that relates to what he said. So quite often in interrogations, the interrogator might casually just insert a detail of the crime that only the guilty party would know into the conversation casually. Like, maybe this happened at a certain location and nobody would really know that, and casually in the beginning as they're talking, they just insert that location to the conversation to see how the person's going to react. Because if the person they're talking to just keeps talking, doesn't really acknowledge the location, it doesn't in any way trip them up or anything, that could be a pretty good sign. But if the person all of a sudden gets nervous about it and is like, oh, I wouldn't know anything about that, I haven't been there in a while, and all of a sudden seems nervous about that topic out of the blue, that might be worth looking into. I'm not saying it's always going to be that crystal clear, but if you start to see some nerves around that topic, you know that in the person's head, there's meaning associated to that location. In fact, it relates to one of my favorite questions that I teach a lot of my clients to ask when you're trying to get to the bottom of something. So whether this is in parenting or a teacher or the head of a company like a CEO or president, and you're trying to figure something out. So as an example, let's say you're a manager of a store and there's some cash missing from the cash register on a regular basis. So you go up to the employees one by one, casually, this isn't a big serious thing, and here's the line. You go, so I heard there's some cash missing from the register on a regular basis. Do you know anything about that? And that's the line. Do you know anything about that? But it's really important to do it with this little bit of a smile, because depending on what the person actually knows, it plays out differently in their head. Because if they know nothing about it and they weren't involved, this kind of comes off as like a bit of gossip. Like, what's going on? Do you know anything? That's why the smile's there. It's casual. Like, do you know? Did you hear? What's going on? And they don't take it as an accusation. But if they do have a bit of guilty knowledge, you might see them start to be like, no, why would I wouldn't know anything about that. I didn't do anything. And they start to get oddly defensive, even if the question wasn't really meant that way. So I love that technique, that kind of double entendre of having two different meanings to the same question that gets interpreted differently depending on the person's involvement. And that's exactly what this is. The statement is, we would wake up together. That's not incriminating. But because in his head, there might be some sketchy stuff that was happening around that time involving Usher, he feels the need to pause because what's in his head is guilty, not the words. Next, we get a classic example of psychological distancing. These are words that we use in order to make things seem less bad. And this was almost blatant, because he goes, when he was 10 and I was a little bit older.
Back in the days when he was like 10 and I was a little bit older, his older brother.
So he's not using that number. He's using a word that makes it seem less bad, a little bit older, right? If I told you that my nephew is 10 years old and his friend is a little bit older, most of us would assume 11, 12, in this case, 19. That's how old Diddy would have been when Usher was 10. He would have been 19 years old. And I think he knows very well that a 19-year-old really has no business hanging out with a 10-year-old, which is why he softens it by going, and I was a little bit older. And then his mind does something psychologically really fascinating that we see in our day-to-day lives, but a lot of people aren't aware as to why this happens. And it's one of my favorite pieces of pop psychology. And it's the idea that our brain has a natural reflex to balance things almost automatically. So think about how when we see something that's really, really cute, like a kitten or a baby, our mind goes to sadness or even aggression sometimes. We say, oh my God, he's so cute, I want to bite him, I want to eat him up. Or we even go to like, oh, he's so cute, and we get sad. We get sad for the cuteness. And that's our mind trying to balance. Because it went to an extreme joy really, really quickly, and your brain doesn't like to go to extremes that quickly, it tries to do something from the opposite side, whether it's aggression or sadness, to kind of try to balance that out and bring you right back to the middle. It's also one of the reasons you might see someone laughing at a funeral or at a sad event. When everyone else is sad, sometimes it's just the nerves and the awkwardness, but it's also because when we experience that sadness, sometimes we just start laughing as a way for our brain to bring us back up to normal and normalize that. I think that's exactly what happened in this case. Because there's something incriminating in his head from that time in his life, his brain went to the polar opposite place. Having cereal in the morning. It's the most innocent, normal thing. So he's going there to try to balance out this weird dark thing that was in his head. So I think we saw all that in real time, right? We saw this thought enter his head. Then we go to something we talk about on the channel a lot, which is an increased cognitive load. When the brain is doing a lot, our words fall apart, right? So we hear what we call verbal leaks or speech disfluency, because he's saying, damn, pause, like check this out. I mean, he's just stumbling. He's looking for those words. A lot of fluff here.
Damn, pause, but like check this out.
Then we get that psychological distancing. When he was 10, I was a little bit older. And then we go to this innocent image of people just eating cereal. Nothing bad could happen when people are eating Frosted Flakes. So what's happening throughout this entire thing is Kevin Hart noticed that something bizarre is going on. And in that Kevin Hart way, with some humor, because it'd be really awkward if he was like, whoa, stop. What the hell are you talking about? He kind of calls them out, but he keeps it funny, he keeps it light. Like, is anyone gonna acknowledge what the heck just happened? Because no one's gonna talk about this except for me. And at that moment, as Kevin Hart is calling out this awkwardness, look at what happens with Diddy. He takes notice of Kevin Hart, he perks up, and we see a seriousness in his face. It's not playful. It becomes playful, but at first, it's not playful. He's looking at Kevin Hart with a very serious tone, and he doesn't just, nudge him or gently. He puts his arm around his neck, and he's got a fist, and he grapples him like this around the neck in a very controlling way. This is a very dominant position, and drags him off the camera. Because Kevin Hart is acknowledging the thing that he didn't want acknowledged, we're seeing this perk up, Target grab and even verbalizes it. He says, shut up, man. And he's literally trying to pull him off.
Flakes. And we're streaming live. That was stupid.
But as Kevin Hart resists and comes back into frame, Diddy realizes that he couldn't get rid of him. He starts laughing, and what else does he do? He looks up and he looks around the room. Like, who else heard that? His mind is immediately going to reputation and social standing. So look, with the Ellen interview, I could ask myself, try to ignore what you know now. Was it obvious that something was going on? And I go back and forth with it. There are certain elements that are weird. But with this video, it's undoubtable. Like, there was something, and it's not obvious what it was. It's still not obvious exactly what it was, but some dark thought that he doesn't want to talk about, that he doesn't want coming to light, enters his head, and everything we see in this video is a result of that. And it's called out, and he doesn't like that at all. Okay, so there it was. I really think these two clips are really interesting, and they've been on my list for a really long time, so this was a good opportunity to just talk about them as a follow-up to the apology video. And again, it's fascinating to go back and look at these, knowing what we know now and being like, okay, there was definitely some red flags there, but of course behavior isn't always black on white. It's not always that obvious, and new evidence gives context to old conversations, and this was just such a great example of that. Let me know what you thought in the comments about all this, and I will see you on the next one.